You guys don't understand how hard it is to be someone who plays video games. It's like, just because I'm amazing and play video games and do nothing else doesn't mean I have all the answers, you know? I can't tell you if a game you like is factually good because then you'd be mad when I'm honest. It's so hard to go to parties these days because I'm surrounded by people who ask me, "What games are you playing, Mr. Gamer?" Or, "Hey gamer, is this a video game?" Or the very common, "Hey, what are you doing in my house at 2 a.m. and why are you covered in duct tape?" It truly is thankless work, but what can weigh on us gamers so heavily more than anything else is that we can't play everything. No matter how hard we try, some games, good and bad, get left in the dust, stuck in the backlog for eternity. Sometimes due to quirks in game design, sometimes due to time, and sometimes due to that lingering concern that you might not like what you play despite the celebration. That was me a couple weeks ago, afraid to dive into classic survival horror due to the misconceptions constantly surrounding the genre. But I found a new love in Resident Evil, and thanks to a recent poll, I had a chance to give Silent Hill 1 a go as well, and now that I've completed it, and you probably haven't, I can confirm I'm a much better person than you. Silent Hill has been in my sights for many, many years, actually literal decades now. It's that holy grail of horror that all horror games, modern and classic, look back on and take inspiration from. Resident Evil may have come first, and hell, other games had horror elements even before that, but Silent Hill was the one that truly revolutionized how people use horror in both gameplay and storytelling, for better and for worse. And despite being a massive horror fan, similar to the Resident Evil series, I've avoided this one. For similar reasons, actually. Reasons like the controls are wonky, the combat is frustrating and clunky, or it's so easy to just get lost. While people in the community tell you, "Oh, but bro, that's what makes it fun." That never has appealed to me. I thought I'd at most respect these games, but hate playing them. But hey, I not only fell in love with Resident Evil 1, but I ended up buying the rest of the series. And yeah, these are all really great games. And that experience with Resident Evil 1, learning that all the stuff was over-exaggerated or just plain wrong, made me extremely interested in trying out Silent Hill. And what do you know? Not to spoil this video too much, but this one's a great pick too. Like I said, I've always had a passing interest for this series. For one, I'm surrounded by people who adore it. For another, I've played games it inspired. Like, even if you've never seen classic Silent Hill, you've probably seen something inspired by it. I'd say most of those cult classic horror games from the late PS1 and PS2 eras are more likely to take inspiration from Silent Hill than anything else. And while that's great, it ended up turning me off of the series. I didn't talk about it too much last time, but I did mention one of the only classic survival horrors I've completed before Resident Evil 1 was Rule of Rose. And while I won't get too deep into it now, that game gave me a damning impression of what these games are. Because that game's gameplay is a frustrating mess, but the story was fantastic. So I kept trudging through hoping the gameplay would match, but it didn't. Ever. It's a story for another time, but I think subconsciously I started to associate that game with what originally inspired it. If that game has stuff I hate, then obviously Silent Hill will too. I knew that that wouldn't totally be the case, but I think it was a weird block I had to make me avoid the game. However, not anymore. I am braced, I am focused, nothing can hurt me ever again. So today, we're digging into Silent Hill, and I'm going to talk about why this game, despite having sequels that have vastly overshadowed it, is still real good. First off, just look at the name, man. Silent Hill. What a fucking perfect horror game name. It's exceptionally simple, but it already just grips me. I'm not kidding about this. I was never so intrigued by a name than I was with this series. I saw it on shelves constantly growing up, and each cover would just take me places and unsettle me as a kid. Even if I don't think the US cover for Silent Hill 1 is all that great, the name in Dark Shadow is immediately captivating and just makes you want to figure out its deal. And holy shit, that PAL cover would have horrified me as a kid. I'd definitely say it fits the game's story a bit more, but Jesus. I think it's kind of amazing how, to me, this game marketed itself just by a name and decent cover art throughout the series. And even though I was, for one, not into horror yet, and two, didn't own the systems these games were on, I felt drawn to them. Not in a full fascination way, but more in a this is definitely not something I'm supposed to look at kind of way. My point is, this game already has me captivated from the title alone, and that's pretty neat. I'm going to be coming at this game from a similar angle as last time, going from things I was most intimidated by to stuff I knew that I would enjoy. But what's kind of amazing about this game is how each part works so harmoniously that I feel like it'll be kind of hard to talk about each thing individually. I'll get more into the harmony part later, but if I mix topics at any point, that's why. So let's start with with the gameplay, and this is where I had many fears going in. See, vulnerability is a very easy way to get someone scared, to get their heart pumping and hands shaking. In a game like Silent Hill, people will tell you the way it does this is by having clunky controls and incredibly difficult combat, making you panic every time you have to do anything. However, like you'd probably expect me to say at this point, that's not really true. The movement isn't really clunky. It's tank controls, and yeah, they can take getting used to, but they're pretty responsive, and the game, as before, is built around them. The main thing you'll be doing in this game is exploring closed-in hallways and rooms, in which the camera will change angles each time you enter a new one. It's not as jarring as something like Resident Evil, but it's still very constant, so having your directions not change with every angle works well for this stuff. However, it wasn't actually the tank controls that worried me this time. After all, I'm used to these by now, and actually prefer them in a lot of cases in games like this. What I was actually worried about was its combat. I've said it before, but clunkiness for the sake of fear really isn't my thing. I think it can work for some people, but not me. And just by looking at this combat, I was prepared to despise it. And to an extent, sure, I can see it being described as unfair or clunky, but when you're actually playing it, it doesn't feel that way. First of all, you can move while shooting guns. This is a massive evolution in video games, and I hope one day other games with guns will learn from its example. This keeps what I said in the last video true. Combat should be your easiest way of dealing with enemies, but it should come at the cost of resources. And absolutely, when it comes to combat, you can annihilate just about anything with a gun. That is, if you're using one. See, this game's combat actually takes what I said and pushes it pretty far, because along with guns, you've also got a healthy selection of melee weapons to add to the options. This is where I can see the argument for clunkiness, because while guns make everything a joke, with the auto aim being insanely generous and the damage incredibly high, you don't just want to waste all your bullets on the normal goons. After all, ammo is limited, of course, and this town is full of monsters. That's when it's time to lean on your healthy supply of melee weapons. Melee combat is what you'll be using most of the time, and on paper, it can suck. While he's surprisingly proficient in firearms, Harry has the physical constitution of me after my 5th shot of whiskey. He can't take too much damage, and he's got a pathetic swinging arm. It seems like this would suck. You've got to deal with so many enemies, and they can all soak up so many hits. However, I found this game's combat system to be not only fun, but incredibly immersive. Harry isn't a combat hero. He's not a soldier. He's a normal dad not equipped to fight anything like this, so he uses weapons probably how a normal person would. Massive swings that constantly leave him wide open. The game has an incredibly immersive atmosphere, not just for its time, but in general. So when you get into fights, it doesn't feel like a video game trying to annoy you. It feels like a man whose hardest fight today was eating an entire sandwich put up against inhuman abominations. But even outside of how it connects you to the character, it's also pretty fun. Melee combat has a rhythm to it, and the main goal of each fight is to figure out how to get into that rhythm. Sometimes it's waiting to swipe a dog out of the air. Sometimes it's learning an attack pattern in order to dodge and counterattack. I love the heavier weapons, as a heavy attack with them can stun an enemy for another hit. The nurses taught me how useful walking backwards is, and made me realize how I kind of forget that I can move around during combat. I don't just have to sit still the whole time. Where I think that rhythm gets messed up is the small areas where the game will throw 3 enemies at you, who can all stun lock you to death. But as unfair as those can seem, it's a matter of remembering that you don't have to engage in melee combat. You still have your guns that can kill fast, and you can also just very smoothly run away. It's these options that really made the combat system for me. If it was all melee, I'd get annoyed. If it was all gunplay, I'd get bored. And if it was all running, I'd get frustrated. But because the game has that immersive element, you never feel locked to any specific answer. I stopped thinking of it in game terms and would instead consider specifically what I wanted to do. And while yes, a lot of that time was bludgeoning them with a hammer, because I love the hammer, it's my favorite, when just traversing the open streets, I never really wasted my time on most of the enemies, which could come back to bite me if multiple chase me down, yes, but it never felt unfair. It felt like my decisions led to it. It never felt like I was overwhelmed just for the sake of it. I had to make decisions, I had to be smart, and I had to bludgeon at the right time. The game still gave me more than enough ammo though, like way more than I ever thought I'd get. So maybe don't be as conservative as me, especially with the pistol. That thing has so much ammo. My mindset was to save ammo for bosses either way though, and I have to say, these were lame. Mostly just pelting them with bullets, maybe wait for a weak point. Hell, even the final boss is like this. Also, I don't know if it was just me, but the final boss barely showed up on the screen. And yeah, his attacks hurt, but when he wasn't attacking, I just spammed him and he died so fast it honestly made me chuckle. The combat normally feels pretty intense. It keeps the stress up as you wonder if you're making the right choices, especially with how horrifying the enemy designs can be. But the bosses kind of make there be only one option, being to shoot them a whole bunch, which kind of took a lot of the tension away. But those boss themes were... Sorry, we'll get to that. The final big bit of gameplay that I was worried about was the puzzles. Most horror games are puzzle-based, but Silent Hill takes that up a notch, at least as an outside looking in. And yeah, they can be pretty fucky. A lot of them are just get item, take it to a place for a different item, continue until the area is done, but a lot of them are legitimate brain teasers. I love the piano one. It gives you a poem about silent birds, each relating to silent keys on the piano, which while it took me a second, I was able to make sense of and felt like a genius. The plate puzzle made me feel like a total dumbass. I understood the colors part, but what I thought was that the way the riddle described the pieces would relate to where they go. Like clovers go in grass, so green and low. But no, the point is for you to figure out the colors go clockwise and match them that way. It's not a bad puzzle, but I felt very dumb. A lot of the puzzles I think can be solved if you just put it together in your head that they aren't as complicated as they seem on the outset. This Zodiac puzzle I just couldn't get. I thought it had to do with the number of months that the Zodiac represented plus the number under it. But no, it's how many legs each symbol had. Much more simple than I expected, and I think as a whole, it's a matter of the clues clicking into obvious spots. But they're still very fun and satisfying to solve. What could be considered a snag though is the constant back and forth for items. You have unlimited inventory, but you may end up missing items, forgetting where some go, or forgetting hints that were in another room. What are you supposed to do then? Well, for one, I actually opened a text document for hints sometimes, as I was that immersed in puzzle solving. However, even that wasn't really necessary, as this game gives you one of the best maps I have ever used in a horror game. Everything you do in an area is cataloged there. Door is locked, it's marked. Door can't be opened at all, marked. Places where you didn't have the right item, places where items can be found, what ways a door can go, it's all listed as you explore, and it's a godsend. I never got overly confused or frustrated because I knew when push came to shove, I had that map to help me along. It's not a full guide, obviously, but it's so intuitive and works so well. I never had moments of, fuck, wait, have I gone in there yet? Because the map always had my back. And while yes, the final area takes it away, it's also the most linear area and doesn't expect you to memorize where things are along with marking doors. It's honestly genius. These areas can be complicated, their puzzles odd to figure out, but because the map fills in those little details, you'll always have a fantastic safety net. I will say this is where the town falters a little bit. As while yes, the map is still fantastic, it doesn't mark every tiny detail like it does in the buildings. So figuring out where exactly to go next at certain times can be a little confusing. Once again, I don't see a huge issue with using a guide to point you in the right direction. Not required by any means, hell, I only used one to check if I was en route to the good ending, but I'd rather a new player be comfortable than get upset while getting lost. Just felt I needed to clarify my reason for mentioning that for some YouTube commenters. But here I am talking all this much about the gameplay, which honest to God, despite me enjoying it thoroughly, is nowhere near what I love most about this game. No, the gameplay is just a piece of this incredibly well put together experience, and now we get to talk about the rest. First off, this game looks crazy good. Like yeah, it's aged, the human models look really funny in cutscenes, but look how insane the town looks. There's signs on buildings and little secrets and details everywhere. The fog obscures you, yes, but it encourages you to look at everything up close. So much love and care goes into each building, whether you can enter them or not. They even match the map, as in on the map you can see building names in blurry text, to which the overworld will always match. Same with street signs. I know it's small, but for a PS1 game, that's crazy. The detail also helps with the environments, as they all feel very lived in. And when the normal world switches to the alternate world, it makes the rusty floors, bloodied walls, and hellish rooms feel all the more immersive. I've used that word a lot, but it's for a reason. These feel like real places, so when an enemy shows up, or the world changes, you feel like you're running in fear in places that feel familiar. The enemies are also incredibly well designed. So many look like people or animals just turned inside out or fused with other creatures. The nurses are the first ones to be truly human, but they've got weird growths coming out of their backs and move like puppets. The Incubus is just horrifying to look at. It's the first enemy that to me looked like a straight demon. Like the rest of the enemies were just monsters, but this thing is much more dangerous. These little ghost kids in the school fucked me up. They don't do anything but fall over and make noise, yet they're everywhere. I had no idea what their deal was. However, in the final area, they actually start to attack you, and that legitimately got me. The game as a whole never had me ultimately terrified, but because things like the alternate world were so outwardly hostile and wrong, it had me on edge constantly. Also, the CGI cutscenes look good. Like, they aren't perfect, they've definitely aged a little bit, but for PS1 CGI, this is actually aged pretty well, and I think that they look pretty great. These visuals are all, of course, being helped by the soundtrack. I may not have played this game before now, but I have loved this soundtrack for years. Obviously not all of it, as a lot of the soundtrack isn't made to be listened to on its own, as it's mainly geniusly used to enhance the atmosphere. There's music, but it's made up of bangs, echoing noises, drones, and it all sounds less like a soundtrack and more of things trying to get you. What's insane though is how well it tricks you. You know when you're in danger, your radio starts going off, but if I was in a new room and the music would get more intense, radio or not, I would panic. But contrasting that is the incredible songs made for things like cutscenes. These tracks are gorgeous. The opening theme with that droning guitar, Lisa's theme, which we will get to her, the credits theme, it's all so good. It's like Akira Yamaoka, the composer for this game's music, was approached with tons of ideas and immediately knew exactly how to make an incredible song. Like, we need a song that creates a spooky intrigue but also dictates a melancholic tone. Okay, so now we need a soundtrack for making the player think they've just made a huge mistake doing what they're supposed to. Okay, this song is just going to be called Die. Now we need a song that is just made of sorrow and regret. Now make one that is a sound nobody would ever want to hear in the history of human nightmares. This is unironically one of my favorite horror game soundtracks ever. It is a perfect mix of horrifying atmosphere, but beautiful, tragic melancholy all in one package. And when I say this game is a perfect combination of everything working together, this soundtrack is the glue fully holding it together. The gameplay wouldn't be as tense, the emotional beats so haunting, and the ending so satisfying if the music didn't hold it all up. Now, let's talk about the story. It's honestly what I was most interested in when playing the game, and by the end, I'll be honest, it's what had me the most conflicted. Let's start with the biggest surprise. The voice acting wasn't that bad. I mean, some of it was. It sounds like Harry's actor didn't have any direction.
I don't know who you are or what you're trying to do, and I don't care. Just one thing. Let Cheryl go. That's all I ask.
And Alessa's was...
No! Get away from me!
yeah. But the rest were either solid or straight up good. Lisa and Dahlia especially. But what I was most surprised by is just how little the game focused on its story. Like, the game's story is fascinating, and we'll get into that in a second, but it's all very backloaded. Like, from the beginning to around the amusement park, it's mostly just Harry and the characters around him reacting to how crazy the city is, with Dahlia Gillespie chiming in to tell you where to go. It's like, the game starts with Harry crashing his car, losing his daughter, and searching for her. But it's not until the final stretch where anything is really explained and explored. It's obvious something really bad is going on, and it does drop hints about the character Alessa and what she has to do with it. But you don't dive into that until the last section of the game, and that was honestly a little bit disappointing. I know, as I've said, the game immerses you in Harry's POV, but what's happening is so interesting that I just wanted to know more. It's not bad by any means, just paced a little weird. But anyways, bitching aside, I mostly loved it. The game's main villain is very obviously Dahlia Gillespie, but if you you want, I think you can argue the main antagonist throughout a lot of it is kind of Alessa. I'm gonna say a lot of this is things that I'm gleaming from what I saw, as the game, at least as far as I know, didn't give me a ton of details. In fact, the info you mostly get is Alessa was supposed to be the host for a god, something happened, she split in two, your daughter is one half, they're reunited, and God is born until you kill him with goo and guns. And through that, Alessa's reincarnated. But it's through occasional notes and just inferring from what we're given along with the endings that despite the harm it's causing, what Alessa is doing isn't really a malicious act, but honestly, a desperate cry for help. Alessa was a young child with psychic powers whose mom was a crazy cultist who led her into a basement and accidentally set her on fire. Immediately, Alessa has gone from emotionally helpless to physically helpless. She's constantly surrounded by people talking about her like she's nothing but a stepping stone for something greater. She's in a situation where nobody would ever want to be in, for a reason she never cared about. It's never explained why she splits part of herself off. Her mom thinks it's an act of rebellion, the doctors just think it's weird, but what I think is that it's Alessa trying to do something, anything, to take a slight modicum of control back. She's forced into a situation where she should be dead. Her body is constantly decaying and bleeding, but then reforming itself. She's pretty much not living, but she can't die. Cheryl is the only part of her that can get out and be in a better situation. And she gets that. She's found by Harry, who, I don't know, man. I don't know much about the guy, but considering his actions, I think he really loves his adopted daughter. Where the real tragedy lies is that despite this tiny sliver of hope, Alessa can never be truly free anymore. Eventually, Cheryl has to return. She's destined to no matter what. And this is where Alessa's final scream for help finally happens. And it's what causes Silent Hill to become what it is. Everything you see, every enemy you fight, even some of the characters are extensions of Alessa. I've heard people complain that outside of Silent Hill 2, the town itself being a representation of people's fears and regrets isn't a thing. But that's not true. The Silent Hill you explore here isn't just a big cult experiment. But it's also not Harry's fears. It's the nightmares a young girl has been having in a hospital bed for 7 years finally being made manifest. A last-ditch effort to stop whatever Dahlia was planning to do to revive her god. What's even more tragic is that nobody gets to win in this scenario. Yes, Dahlia could be killed by the monsters, but so could Harry, who's innocent of all of this. And the best outcome for Alessa is that she plunges the town into the other world and dies along with it. And not everyone stuck in the town destined to die is guilty of what happened to Alessa. Dahlia is, Dr. Kaufman certainly is, as he was involved in a lot of what happened to her. In fact, he's one of the most evil people here, if you ask me. Not only is a lot of what happened his fault, but to keep people from leaving, he gets them hooked on drugs, and then has the gall to try and leave without consequence once it all comes back to bite him. Harry is innocent. Sybil Bennett, the cop that saves you at the beginning of the game, is also innocent. And so is another person. And I think it's time to talk about Lisa. Lisa Garland is not a villain. She's involved with what happened pretty loosely, in fact. But in the end, she's another victim. First a victim of the cult and Dr. Kaufman, and now, unfortunately, a victim of Alessa's final gambit. Silent Hill has become a manifestation of Alessa's psyche, her memories and fears of what happened to her all becoming real and violent. Dr. Kaufman refuses to speak with you about it, but it's clear he's involved. Officer Sybil came at the wrong time, an innocent but one who's able to defend herself. But then there's Lisa, a nurse, and the only one to have survived whatever happened at the hospital. All the other nurses are long dead, but why is she fine? You get hints throughout the game, and in your second to last meeting with her, you can start to put the pieces together. She can't leave the hospital, she's barred from entering certain areas, and she's constantly cold. I unironically put a hand over my mouth when this cutscene played because this is where I pieced it together, and when you next see her, she's pieced it together too. Lisa was Alessa's bedside nurse, manipulated by the cult and Kaufman to stay despite how traumatizing the situation was. When Alessa took over Silent Hill, it's implied Lisa died with the rest of the nurses. But because Lisa was so important to Alessa, as one of the only people who was kind and caring towards her, she remained. Whether it's her actual soul being trapped, like I personally think it is, or a manifestation of those positive memories, doesn't matter. Because once Lisa remembers, she begins to literally fall apart. Her theme quietly playing in the background as you realize that there's nothing you can do for her. She's already dead. She's been dead. She's just stuck here. And now that she knows the truth, she's suffering the same way Alessa did, basically dying an infinite death until this all can be put to an end. Lisa wasn't trapped or killed by Alessa on purpose. In fact, everything that happened to her can also be blamed on the cult. However, I think Lisa is important because it seals in you just how much all of this needs to end. There's no happy ending here anymore. It's all gone too far, and the suffering will only continue until Alessa can be at peace. And that's what I think we're fighting for at this point. Not even to get Cheryl back, not killing Dahlia, but just giving Alessa any sort of peace you can. And now it's giving Lisa peace as well. I think that's why after you kill the Incubus, the game ends the way it does. At least for me, because I personally got the best ending. As utterly depressing as it is, Alessa was always doomed. She never had a chance, never had a say. Even plunging Silent Hill into hell was basically prolonging her own pain just to try to save others. She can't leave, not the way she is now. So she reincarnates herself as a baby, entrusting herself to the man who's already proved he can be a loving father and the protector she always needed. Harry isn't a crazy deep character in this game, but I think that's the point. He proves over and over that he will do whatever he can for others, and especially for his daughter. And despite how heartbreaking it is that Alessa has to die and Harry has to lose his daughter, this was the best outcome for both of them in this incredibly dire situation. Cheryl was never supposed to exist, but because of the love Harry gave her, Alessa can exist again, happy and loved. And despite Harry losing his daughter, I mean, he got her back in a way? It's hard to word. We know Harry will adore this daughter, but I kind of wanted to know how he feels about it. Like, yes, he kind of has Cheryl back in a way, but he lost his version of Cheryl. I don't know. Like I said, it is beautiful, but I think it needed a little more. And that's how I would describe the game's story. It needs a little more. Not that it needs to be longer, I think it's a perfect length. I think I just could have used more character interactions, more things explained outside of extra notes, just more. That's how I'd describe it. What I've gleaned from it is incredibly meaningful to me. I adored it, but I feel like I was putting most of those pieces together when I would have liked the game to do the same. I was left a bit wanting, but don't let that dissuade you. I loved this game's story. I loved its ending. I love how deeply tragic the whole thing is, but how hopeful the ending is specifically for Alessa. And honestly, I think adding more could have made it feel overblown or too over the top. One thing I really loved was how in the end, how small it all felt. The stakes in the end were incredibly high. That's a demon. It could kill a lot of people and cause an apocalypse. But when I watched that section of Sybil and Harry running away, baby in tow, as Alessa uses the last bit of her strength to let them escape, well, that gorgeous ending theme played. Just how small in the end this all was. It was a short story about something that happened in a small vacation town on the water, and nobody, outside of those who it affected, will probably remember it. And I think the brevity of what we got adds to that feeling, and I loved that feeling. I wouldn't say Silent Hill was as fun as Resident Evil for me. It was a good time, but it wasn't a game going out to be a fantastic time with minute-to-minute action. It's an incredibly thoughtful game that really digs into you as you play, with one of the best worlds I've ever experienced in horror. I know, the sequels are supposed to be crazy good, just as, if not more, thought-provoking and melancholic. And I mean, judging by their soundtracks, I would agree. Seriously, this shit is so good, go listen to it. This game has its hooks in me. I've thought about its themes and locations so much outside of playing it, and that's incredible considering how it looks like this. This is a PS1 game with so much to think about, and I am so happy that even if I got to the party late, I still got to experience it. I'm excited to visit this sleepy town again, whether it be through a replay or its sequels. And that will happen eventually. Maybe not in a video, maybe in my own time. But I will say, just like Resident Evil, I have come to a new appreciation for this game, and I'm very excited to try its sequels. But for now, I want to go play Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. And you know what? I think I might also have a score to settle. But in terms of the town of Silent Hill, for now, I'm never coming back.